You probably think you know the story. A single, catastrophic fire, a tragic, world-changing bonfire of knowledge where the wisdom of the ancient world was turned to ash. One terrible accident that sent humanity spiraling into 1,000 years of darkness. But what if I told you that's a lie? A convenient, simple story we tell ourselves to cope with a much uglier truth. The Great Library of Alexandria wasn't murdered in a single night. It was the victim of a slow, painful death. A death by 1,000 cuts inflicted over centuries, by apathy, by politics, and by fear. And the real question isn't just how it was destroyed, but what kind of world we would be living in right now if it had survived. What future did we lose? And could we ever get it back?
To understand what we lost, you have to understand what it was. In the 3rd century BC, in the heart of Alexandria, Egypt, the shining new center of the world, the Ptolemaic dynasty began a project of unimaginable ambition. It was called the Museum, the institution of the Muses, and its crown jewel was the library. The goal wasn't just to collect some books, it was to collect all books. Every scroll from every corner of the known world. Agents were sent out with massive budgets. Ships docking in Alexandria's harbor were forcibly searched, and any book found was confiscated, copied by expert scribes, and the original was placed in the library. They were creating the first true brain of planet Earth, a centralized repository for all human knowledge.
The story you know, the one that gets all the attention, is the tale of Julius Caesar in 48 BC, accidentally burning the library to the ground during his war in Alexandria. It's a clean story. It's dramatic, it has a world-famous historical figure at its center, and it fits nicely in a textbook. And like most clean stories from history, it's not really true. Let's set the scene. Caesar is besieged in the royal palace, vastly outnumbered by the forces of Ptolemy XIII. In a desperate move, he orders his men to set fire to the enemy ships in the harbor to prevent his escape route from being cut off. The fire does its job, and then some. It leaps from the ships to the docks, consuming the warehouses along the waterfront. And according to the historian Plutarch, those warehouses contained scrolls, a lot of them. Some say as many as 40,000. But here's the crucial detail everyone misses. Were those scrolls the library? Almost certainly not. They were likely scrolls held in storage for export, or perhaps an overflow collection. The proof? The great geographer Strabo was working and writing in Alexandria decades after Caesar's fire. He speaks at length about the Museum, the grand institution to which the library was attached. He never once mentions it being a ruin. He talks about it as a living, breathing center of learning. The idea of a single tragic fire is a myth. The reality is far more depressing. The library didn't die in a blaze of glory. It suffered a death by 1,000 cuts. It was a slow, agonizing cancer that ate away at the heart of the ancient world for centuries.
The first cut wasn't fire, it was politics. In 145 BC, long before Caesar, the ruler Ptolemy VIII, nicknamed Physcon or Potbelly, began a series of brutal purges. In a fit of paranoia, he expelled every foreign scholar from Alexandria. It was a catastrophic brain drain. The greatest minds of the world were sent packing, and the spirit of open inquiry was replaced with political loyalty. The library ceased to be a global project and became a state-run institution, subject to the whims of increasingly unstable rulers. The next cut was neglect. As the Roman Empire absorbed Egypt, Alexandria's status shifted. It was no longer the capital of a wealthy kingdom, but just another provincial hub in a sprawling, bureaucratic empire constantly on the brink of civil war. Budgets for things like painstakingly recopying decaying papyrus scrolls, they weren't a priority. Papyrus is fragile. It flakes. It mildews. It turns to dust. Without constant, loving maintenance by an army of scribes, a library of papyrus scrolls will literally devour itself over time. Then came the physical blows, the real kinetic destruction. In the 270s AD, the Emperor Aurelian laid siege to Alexandria to crush the breakaway Palmyrian Empire. The fighting was fiercest in the Bruchian district, the royal quarter, the original home of the museum and the Great Library itself. The entire district was, according to historians, leveled. This was likely the real, unceremonious death of the main library. No great fire, no single moment of tragedy, just the grinding, anonymous destruction of urban warfare, a forgotten casualty in a forgotten conflict. But the final, symbolic blow, the cut that truly severed the ancient world from what was to come, happened in 391 AD. The target was the Serapeum, a magnificent temple, a wonder of the ancient world, and the home of a daughter library that held tens of thousands of priceless scrolls from the main collection. By this point, a new power was rising, a zealous, fundamentalist Christianity that saw the old gods and their temples as demonic. Theophilus, the Patriarch of Alexandria, a man of immense power and ambition, received a decree from the emperor to destroy all pagan sites. The Serapeum was the grandest of them all. This wasn't about books anymore, it was about ideology. A mob, sanctioned by the state, descended on the temple. They smashed the idols, desecrated the holy sites, and burned the scrolls. Not out of carelessness, but as an act of pious erasure. It was a declaration that a new kind of knowledge was in charge now, one that didn't require questioning, debate, or the wisdom of the past. And just like that, the final flicker of the ancient world's brightest light was snuffed out. Not by accident, but by the cold, deliberate act of closing a book for the very last time.
So, what was actually in those 500,000 scrolls? What blueprints for the future did we let turn to dust? It wasn't just poetry and lost plays, though the scale of that loss alone is heartbreaking. Sophocles, the Greek tragedian, wrote over 120 plays. Today, we have 7. We are watching a TV series with over 100 missing episodes. But the loss that truly changed our timeline was the loss of scientific and technical knowledge. It was a treasure map to a different world. Let's start with the most famous example, Heron of Alexandria. We mentioned his steam engine, the Aeola Prile. But that wasn't a one-off invention. Heron was obsessed with automation. His scrolls contained designs for the world's first vending machine. Put a coin in, get a measure of holy water. He designed automatic doors that would swing open when a fire was lit on the altar, seemingly by divine power. He designed programmable robots using a system of ropes and gears. This wasn't just a tinkerer. This was the mind of an automaton engineer, 2,000 years ahead of his time. The library didn't just hold a steam engine. It held the mindset of automation itself. Then there was the knowledge of the cosmos. We mentioned Aristarchus, the man who figured out the solar system 1,700 years before Copernicus. But he wasn't alone. Eratosthenes, the head librarian, not only calculated the circumference of the Earth with stunning accuracy, using nothing but sticks, wells, and shadows, he also calculated the tilt of the Earth's axis. Then there was Hipparchus. He created the first comprehensive catalog of over 850 stars and their brightness. To do this, he essentially invented trigonometry. Yes, the math that gave you nightmares in high school is also the indispensable tool that lets you navigate an entire planet. This knowledge wasn't abstract. It was the key to global exploration. Its loss meant that for over 1,000 years, sailors were essentially sailing blind.
But perhaps the most profound loss was in medicine. The chief physician in Alexandria, Herophilus, did something that was forbidden for the next millennium. He systematically dissected human bodies. His work, now lost, contained detailed descriptions of the nervous system. He was the first to understand the difference between motor and sensory nerves. He correctly identified the brain, not the heart, as the seat of intelligence and consciousness, directly challenging the teachings of Aristotle. For centuries after the library's fall, European medicine was dominated by the theories of Galen, a Roman physician whose work, while important, was based on animal dissections and forbade challenging his authority. The scientific, evidence-based medicine of Alexandria was replaced by 1,000 years of dogma, a loss that can be measured in millions of lives lost to ignorance. This is the point where our timeline doesn't just bend, it shatters. In our world, this trove of knowledge vanished. The West fragmented and fell into what we call the Dark Ages. It wasn't that knowledge completely disappeared, but the central engine driving it forward had been destroyed. The interest rate on intellectual progress dropped to near zero. But in a world where the library survives, the Dark Ages never happen. The knowledge isn't just preserved in a dusty museum, it's a living university. It's copied, debated, challenged, and improved upon. Imagine the sheer pragmatism of Roman engineers, the greatest builders of the ancient world, combined with the theoretical genius of Greek mathematics. Suddenly, Heron's automatic doors are being used in Roman temples. His steam pumps are being refined to pull water from mines, fueling the empire's immense need for resources. A medical revolution takes hold. With the knowledge of Herophilus spreading, Roman physicians understand sanitation. They understand how nerves work. The devastating plagues that crippled the late empire are now manageable, perhaps even contained, strengthening the legions in the cities. Instead of collapsing, the Western Roman Empire might have stabilized, evolved. Monasteries in Ireland aren't just desperately preserving a few fading texts. They're receiving new treatises on optics and engineering from the scholars in Alexandria. Knowledge is compounding. Year after year, decade after decade, the intellectual momentum builds. And when knowledge compounds for 1,000 years without interruption, the results aren't just advanced, they are unrecognizable.
So let's jump forward. Let's get to the truly mind-bending part of this new timeline. The year is 1200 AD. In our timeline, Europe was in the midst of the Crusades. In this new timeline, the Industrial Revolution is already in full swing. Steamships, powered by Alexandrian engineering, are crossing the Atlantic centuries before Columbus. Navigating with advanced astronomical charts that accept the Earth is round and revolves around the Sun. By the 1600s, when our timeline was just inventing the telescope, this timeline is building massive observatories, charting the moons of Jupiter, and understanding the laws of gravity. The scientific method isn't a new idea, it's ancient history. And this is where it gets profound. The sheer compounding effect of a 1,500-year head start on science is almost impossible to comprehend. By the time our world was marveling at the first electric light bulb in the late 1800s, this alternate world, this Alexandrian timeline, was already splitting the atom. They were harnessing nuclear power when we were still riding horses. And today, right now, in 2025, they wouldn't be a civilization worried about leaving their planet. They would be a civilization actively settling it. We wouldn't be looking for signs of life on Mars. We would be the life on Mars. Our greatest political debates wouldn't be about borders and resources, but about asteroid mining rights and the ethics of terraforming. That 1,500-year head start isn't just an advantage. It's the difference between a Type 0 civilization, still bound to its home planet, and a functional Type 1 civilization, masters of their own solar system. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria wasn't just the loss of scrolls and ink. It was the theft of a future. It was a failure of imagination on a scale so grand we can barely measure it. It proves that knowledge isn't just a record of the past, it is the engine of the future. And it's a fragile engine. It requires constant maintenance, protection, and most of all, the courage to value what we don't yet understand. It makes you wonder, what knowledge are we letting slip through our fingers today? In our digital age of endless information, what priceless scrolls are we letting burn through sheer neglect? What libraries are we failing to protect right now? So, what do you think? What would have been the single greatest change if the library had survived? Let me know your theory down below.